Good morning, world. I'm Steve Rao, the host of Pod and Roku TV's World Edition, greeting you live from the All-America city of Morrisville in the Research Triangle Park, the eighth largest state in North Carolina, the eighth largest state in the United States, North Carolina. And as the host of this show, we welcome you when we talk about global affairs, innovation, a divisive political world, a war in Ukraine, a looming global recession. But today, my commentary is focused on the midterm elections. President Joe Biden, the Democratic Party, have pulled off a midterm election for the record books, as the Democrats have contained control of the Senate, doing worse than holding steady at 50 seats and potentially gaining one, and looking likely that they're going to at least keep any net losses in the House to single digits. Midterms are supposed to be the time for the opposition party to shine. That's what I predicted, along with many of the analysts on this show. And what we are seeing today is the largest midterm victory by a president and his party in the last century in the United States of America. One of the four best midterms in the history of our country. During record time inflation, low approval ratings of a president, hovering around 42%. What happened? And I got to be honest with you, I think Joe Biden is positioned to win the presidency based on this result, possibly. 2 years is a long time. But the Republicans completely failed in this election, largely because of one man and one man alone, Donald J. Trump. The former president's endorsements across the country did not win in many of the states. North Carolina, a perfect example, where Wiley Nickel will be heading to Congress. He called me yesterday. He's in Washington. He beat Bo Hines handily. Ted Budd did win, but a number of the candidates that were endorsed by Trump, like in Nevada, Secretary of State's candidates that were recruited by Trump, who control elections. Many of these candidates didn't have experience. They were election deniers. They were MAGA warriors. Well, the MAGA warriors lost the battle, folks. Pretty embarrassing for the Republican Party. Now, I've done some research. Democrats' performance has funneled down to the state level. And it's the first time since 1924 that a president's party had the net gain of governorships in a president's midterm. 1986 is the only other time, and that the 1934 midterm was a huge victory. Now also, Franklin D. Roosevelt and John F. Kennedy had successes after midterms, but their approval ratings were very high. Very popular presidents, unlike President Biden. So we don't know where this is going to go. But I think at the end of the day, I want to close out with this. The Republican Party is now faced with a dilemma. Governor Ron DeSantis is most likely going to be running for the nomination, and we're expecting an announcement from Donald Trump soon. Would a divided Republican Party make things even worse, particularly going into a general election? If the economy does get better, if we can get inflation down, if the president can start showing results of his infrastructure acts and his ARP acts and the climate change and all of the investments that he's making, can Joe Biden pull off a miracle? Could he be reelected to the presidency? Well, right now, I wouldn't count Joe Biden out of anything. But I will say this was a surprise that all of us will talk about today. What does it mean for the future of the United States? How does the world view these elections as you're looking outside in on the United States? And where will this take us? Let's get started. Today we have with us Mark Lee, Lee Newton Rhodes, and Nick Paladiva, and others will be joining. Well, I'll begin, gentlemen, and I got to tell you, as an analyst, I got it wrong. I predicted a red tsunami, a red wave, and it looks like the red tsunami became a red wave. The red wave became a red puddle. The red puddle became a red trickle, and now it's a red raindrop. And the largest, midterm victory, one of the largest in the history of the country. So I think a lot of us are just are surprised. And for those Republicans out there, I think you should be very concerned, because if you can't win a midterm with the president at approval rating of 41%, then I think you're in trouble. But guys, what do you think? Good news for Joe Biden?
I have a question. How much integrity do you think we have in these elections? And I'll tell you why. New York is a very large state. They counted by midnight. Did they not? Florida, Texas, California. Only certain states, for some reason, dragged on. Why is that? And they're much, much smaller. I just have questions. It's not based on anything other than just looking at what's going on.
Well, I think the problem is, of course, that the elections are controlled by the states, Lee. So,
Okay.
And
Are they that incompetent?
Yes. In other words, every state's different. Now, part of the reason why Florida gets their votes in so quickly,
right?
They decide to spend the money to upgrade their systems when we had the Hanging Chad issue, and so they upgrade their systems so they got the vote. They get the votes in. We have a hodgepodge of election laws. There's another thing. In other words, like some states allow you to turn in your ballot if you mail it 4 days after the close of the polls. Okay, well,
Nick, whatever you're going to say, I'm going to agree with. But after 2020, I would think that those states that struggled would go to those states that didn't and say, you know what, I want to get this right. Help me.
Yeah, well, they want to get right under different terms. So let's say that we have a state that allows, if you're military and you're filing a ballot from overseas, you have 7 days after the close of the polls for them to receive the ballot. Well, that gives them more time to obviously count the ballots and get a final count. So because of the hodgepodge of election laws, we end up with the results that we have different. Now, what I'm very curious is, because I know Steve's all giddy about the Democrats winning. I was in Salt Lake City this week, and they were all saying the Republicans are winning, but I was listening to this thing called Fox News, and they said it was a big victory for the Republicans. So I don't get it. Who really won this election? But I'm curious as to who won the governorship of Arizona. That would be, because when I looked at
Kari Lake lost.
Who?
Kari Lake lost.
Now, was that final? Because when I checked it yesterday, it was only 88% of the vote was in.
Yeah, it's final, I think.
Is it final?
Yep.
So you're talking the Republican challenger lost, right?
The Trump-backed challenger lost.
Okay, well, if that is true, because I haven't seen the verification on that, if that's true, then I can tell you what was happening with Fox this weekend in Salt Lake. They were just saying they're going to win the Senate, win the House, win everything. In other words, it was a complete, basically bigger line.
Maybe in this case, the polls were deceptive. So I think that's one interesting thing. Every time the polls predict something, this happened in 2016, or 2000.
No, it wasn't a prediction. One prediction. I was listening to this very intensely because I very seldom listen to Fox. My wife won't allow it on our TV thing here because she thinks it's corrupt. And by the way, she's right. Okay, I'm not. It was 100% guarantee the Republicans were going to win the Senate and the governorship of the state of Arizona. It wasn't a prediction; it was a guarantee. And they went through all this mishmash of how these late votes coming in will make them win. And what you're telling me, Steve, is that didn't happen.
Yes, it did not happen. I mean, if you look at let's go through the list here, and then we're going to get into some other issues around the world. But I do want to dedicate some time to this, and it's good practice for me because I'm going to be doing some other news shows today on this. I think what happened was that, first of all, Donald Trump was a big factor in this. Okay, he had come up with a strategy that he was going to endorse these MAGA warriors, these extremists, these election deniers, to come in like Kari Lake, Herschel Walker still in a runoff, but these races were going to be landslides, and then he was going to go into a mandate to win the Republican nomination, and Biden would be lose the Senate. So I think number one, this strategy was simply rejected by many voters across the country. It did not work. Donald Trump has lost Nevada. He lost all the Secretary of State's candidates he recruited. Brad, the guy in Georgia, won, the incumbent. He was the one that did not work with Trump on the Georgia when he asked for more votes to be counted. And so Donald Trump's a major factor. The second major factor, as an analyst, I would say, is that this whole idea of Biden's democracy on attack didn't work, right? But I think that was neutralized by everyone saying, well, the election is a fraud. All these people are in there, whatever, fraud, denier. And I think people, the good news in our democracy, they rejected that. And maybe the American people went in there and said, I'm going to vote for the people that I think. What's interesting is they did it with a president that was a 41% approval rating, highest inflation in 40 years at 8.2%, a jack up in the interest rates in the midst of labor shortages, and they still elected many, many Democrats over Republicans. So I think that I look at this as the future of the GOP. What they're going to do now is a divided party. I do believe this is very good news for Joe Biden's reelection chances, even though it's early. I do think the president will run again. I think he'll announce very soon, probably in the next week to 10 days. And I think Biden will be he'll be 80 years old when he wins reelection. But I truly believe he will be running again.
Steve, everything you said is true. I'm just shocked that the Democrats were not held more accountable for all those things that you said, plus all the COVID restrictions that people have been complaining about, not holding any politicians responsible for them.
People have a short memory. My dad always jokes it's a 2-week country, 2 weeks and they forget and they go on to the next, right? And I think that
it's that long.
Yeah, maybe Lee, maybe you raise a good point. That's a brilliant point. Maybe if they had focused more on the issues, instead of talking about MAGA warriors and denying elections and all that stuff, they might have had a fighting chance. But they spent the entire time, and let's face the matter, some of these candidates had no experience.
Right.
Literally, look, everyone was mad at me that I was being too, and I apologize to the network as a moderator. So I am a moderate Democrat, but I'm very popular with Republicans in my home city of Morrisville. But when I said Bo Hines didn't have the experience, a 26-year-old who has never had a job cannot be a United States congressman.
It's not a good
Right. Steve, should I give you the name AOC?
Well, I agree. She shouldn't be in Congress either.
Yeah. Who elected her? What state did she come out of?
New York.
I agree. I think the standards is held both ways.
Hold on a second. Coming out of coming out of New York and coming out of some other states, I don't think is a problem, and actually do not mind young people being in positions of power and all of that. I think that sometimes that youth voice is needed. And yes, I'm speaking as a 60-year-old man, but I definitely have heard some great things from some of our political leaders and others that are giving you that youth voice and that youth energy. And I do think that they sometimes come up with innovative ideas. We can even look at the climate change argument and some of the activists that were in the climate change space or Black Lives Matter. A lot of these were folks that were 18 to 20. Let's even look back at the civil rights era. We're talking about folks that were in a college at A&T and a number of other things, and even some of the other things. So I'm not just discount the youth voice and all of that, or the youth voice even in national politics. And yes, I actually am somewhat of a fan of AOC. I do know that she's maybe overly progressive, and not saying that I agree with everything that she did. And even Obama himself, who did become president, started doing his activism work at a very young age. And even the Clintons did. Hillary and Bill were very much activists at young ages. So like I said, I acknowledge I am 60 years old, but I'm not just going to have y'all say that we can't have some youth energy in there, whether it's on the local political side, because I've seen a lot of young people in our Durham political offices, as well as some of our other political offices as well. So I do not think that there needs to be a restriction on the other way. Not saying I want a 16-year-old in there, but definitely I think that some of the 20-year-olds can bring some energy. And sometimes those fresh ideas are needed, because I also don't want a lot of old stale folks that are given a lot of things that have also been corrupted by the politics as well. So that's another problem on the opposite side.
Mark, I hear you. You want to comment on term limits?
Hey,
I have no problem with term limits. I think that we need term limits.
We were just joined by Sasha Starr, and we're going to get an update from Ukraine. But Sasha, I basically was saying that this was the largest midterm victory for an incumbent president in the last 50 to 100 years in America, and we're just trying to figure out what happened. As you look at this from Canada, what in your opinion happened? Why did Joe Biden win? Not since 1934 has a president won a midterm in such, retaining his seat in the Senate, and the House looks like they could retain that. We're not sure yet. But what are your thoughts?
You didn't need Biden to win this election. Any human being who can talk and breathe would win this, because there is a demise, complete demise of the Republican Party. Look, they were for years, they were going on with the Let's Make America Great Again, so-called MAGA. Then they added this fabulous, the election was stolen. So now there is another election was stolen. How come nobody claims that election was stolen, that actually it was Republicans who won Senate and House and everything else, and the wave, red wave or black wave or whatever it might be there? Where is that? So it must have been stolen. So they understand by now that, and we'll see tomorrow, there's Trump's announcement forthcoming. I can bet 99% he's not going to announce his run for presidency, because he's not that stupid. He's a moron, but to be that stupid as to lose election after election, lost Senate, lost House, 2 impeachments. Oh, come on! There must be a point where he will say, "Well, I've done my thing. I fought." Didn't work out the way I wanted it, but we had great time. Thank you so much. But I'm not so sure that he even has that decency to pronounce such words. So Republicans now, once Trump is out, hopefully tomorrow, they have to come up with something on their plate besides MAGA, besides election was stolen, nobody is buying that anymore, the independent for sure, the Democrats are laughing and all that stuff. So they have to come up with new ideas, new people. Something has to change. Otherwise, this is a completely impotent party for impotent people. That's about it.
Hey, Sasha, really quick question, and this goes for you too, Steve. One of the things that I was hearing, and I actually had the pleasure last night of going to do an event for the veterans and everything, so I actually did that as part of our Road to the Apollo. But as I was talking to my photographer friend on the ride down to Dublin, North Carolina, we were actually wondering about the power of the women's vote, because a lot of people were thinking that there was going to be a little bit of a pushback because of the Dobbs decision, and it does look like that pushback may have happened. So I was just wondering, do you feel that the women came out to vote and that Dobbs may have pushed some of that conversation, and will it be having an impact further into what goes on? And I'd love to hear from both Lee, Sasha, and Steve as to whether we think that the Dobbs decision and the whole Roe versus Wade conversation is going to have the impact that some folks were thinking that it might not have, but it does look to me like it did have an impact. But I was just wondering y'all's take, Lee or Steve or Sasha.
I'll take a stab on it. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I apologize. I'm blank on this because, like in New York, for Hochul to win over Lee Zeldin, when crime was in the headlines for days after day, I'm shocked. I don't have a take on this. I don't know why, who's winning, and what. Steve, maybe you can give me some insight on this.
Well, I do think that the initially when I was on PBS, I said that the abortion issue, running on that, I think it depends on what races and what states. I mean, I do believe that across North Carolina, inflation and the economy were more important than women's reproductive rights and healthcare.
100%.
That's why Sherry Beasley lost. However, if you break that down into local areas in the state, like Wake County, where I live, which is a more progressive and blue county, you saw in these tight races between Republicans and independent and Democrats. One example is Sydney Batch. She was running against Mark Cavaliero. Many predicted her to lose. A black woman, state senator running for a second term, for a second term. She won, and abortion was the main issue there. Same with another race, Mary Willis Bodie. The Republicans still won a super majority and didn't get it in the House. But so maybe the issue did turn people out in certain pockets of the country, but I don't think nationally it was as big for either side. And one thing I'll end with that might be the explanation. Bill Maher, on when he was being interviewed by Fareed Zakaria, he said that maybe people just said, particularly independents, well, if the courts won't allow me to get an abortion, I'm just going to go to a state where I'm allowed to get an abortion. And there was a kind of like this pragmatic acceptance, right? And they just didn't make as big of a deal about it on either side, right? Now, I would like to get that number. How many people voted for that? If we poll the people that voted, how many people voted because of the Dobbs versus Jackson decision? Or was it like, you know what, I'm voting, so that's the interesting thing about elections. What were the factors driving them when they walked in that ballot box? That's the beautiful thing about voting. You only know until you go in there, that one moment where you're there and you see the names, and it's just a gut check, right? You're like,
no doubt about that. But the other thing that I was wondering about, I'd love to hear both of your thoughts about this, and you actually mentioned her and everything, is a lot of people do not feel that Miss Beasley actually ran a strong campaign. And a lot of people felt that she was maybe thinking that she was going to have her designated area of where she's at, being Durham, as being a great campaign and all of that. But it did not seem like a very effective campaign. I did not see her doing a lot of campaigning outside of her home district. And as my friend put it, the photographer I was just referring to, she's a judge, and she pretty much ran as a lot of times judges will when they're going for other seats and everything. So I was just wondering, Steve, do you feel that it was a strong campaign? Because I definitely did not see her doing a lot of campaigning. The ads were, in my mind, weak, and definitely I did not see her reaching out into other parts of the regions.
In my analogy of that political campaign, what I will tell you, and then after a few minutes, we're going to get into war in Ukraine, and we're going to talk about some other issues. But I think, in my opinion, she made a call early on. There are two reasons why I think Beasley lost. The first is her opponent, Ted Budd, who was a MAGA warrior, a Trump supporter, endorsed Trump the whole way through when he was in Congress, thanked him at his victory speech along with Laura Trump. He said that the economy, this election is about three things: what I'm paying for groceries, what I'm paying for gas, and how much money we're spending. Not once did a Ted Budd ad talk about Donald Trump. Okay. Beasley talked about Trump a lot, and Budd as a hardliner. She focused more on reproductive rights and healthcare costs. Didn't really talk much about what they were going to do if she was in the Senate for energy, for inflation, for all of these things, rising grocery prices. And that's the first reason I think her messaging was off. Second reason, she didn't have the national support. So Georgia and Pennsylvania were getting much more attention between Fetterman and Herschel Walker. Somehow the Beasley race lost visibility, and I didn't see Barack Obama, the only Black American president we've ever had. Why didn't he come here and shove for Steri Beasley, who was looking to be the first Black woman ever elected to the U.S. Senate, and was actually a very viable candidate, having been a former Supreme Court justice and a former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and the only Black woman that won two elections to the Court of Appeals. So, last minute they brought down Oprah. I think she did like a Zoom call. Even Kamala Harris didn't come. So, Mark, I'm going to say that I don't think Beasley's completely to blame here. I think when the Democrats recruit these candidates, if they're not going to go all in, then we're not doing well with electing Black candidates for the U.S. Senate, going back to Harvey Gantt. And now this, although the irony is you got Mark Robinson, who's the presumptive nominee for Republican nominee for governor of North Carolina. So, I mean, does he have a chance, right?
It's going to be interesting because he's got some conservative views, and a lot of people are going to be watching that and seeing what happens in that regards. I'll be interested to see whether folks decide to try to lobby Reverend Barber to being a candidate. He's definitely got some of that Jesse Jackson kind of charisma, but he's also got some issues around some of the other things in his own organization and all of that. But he has been running the Poor People's Campaign, so there may be some folks that are trying to push him into the presidential limelight, and it'll be interesting to see what happens in that regards.
So, Sasha,
Mark,
tell us about Ukraine. Tell us more. Go ahead, Liam. I want to get to Sasha.
Just real quick, Mark. There's been some candidates who did very successful. They won their races, but they really never campaigned. Biden was famous for hiding in the basement. Fetterman never came out for a while. And even Hillary Clinton, she went a long time during the campaign of not having press conferences.
Yep.
I'm not sure how important these campaigns are.
What do you mean how important they are? In what regards?
I think people dig into whatever they're going to vote based on the party line, regardless of how their candidate campaigns or not.
Well, no,
So
I
I'm not
agree with
really
you.
sure
And
how important their campaigns are.
no, I agree with you, and I think we talked about on this show before that I have seen a lot of people that will definitely vote their, if not their party line, their interest group lines. Because as I've said on this show, and I know that we've talked about it a couple of times, there are a lot of people that vote according to what the Sierra Club or the some of these other groups. I'm just using the Sierra Club as an example, or even some of these PACs tell them to vote, and definitely some of the Democratic candidates or even the Republican platform telling them to vote. I wish that more people would actually analyze the issues and make a more independent decision, because I think that
Some
sometimes it's
critical
almost
thinking would
like,
be nice. Yes.
yeah.
Steve, you're going to say about Ukraine, please?
Yeah, Sasha, please, what's going on in Ukraine?
I'll tell you what's going on with Ukraine. Before this war, how many people outside of Ukraine knew about places like Zaporizhia, New Kakhovka, even Kherson, for Christ's sake, and much smaller places like Bucha, like Belogolovka, and others. Not too many, probably none at all. It's not really about Ukraine and Russia fighting for some territories here and there. No, it's not. It's a fight of Russia against all civilized world. They're trying to impose a new world order that America, United States is no longer the hegemon, the country with the largest economy in the world, with the largest financial muscles, and finally the most potent, strongest, best equipped military. They are trying simply by playing a poker game to overturn others and just say, well, look, there's nothing you can do. We have the nuclear arms. So, you know what, be nice to us. You do whatever we say, when we say, or so on. But that's all backfired badly because of the impotent Russian army, where everything has been stolen from and has all the idiots, generals, and of course their supreme ruler. And that's all becoming now to the end, and it's very soon. There will be a disintegration of Russia because Russia can exist only as imperialistic power. If it's not, and it cannot keep expanding, it's dead. That's what's happening in Ukraine.
Okay, I mean it's tough. And we keep praying for Ukraine, and this thing is going to go on. Real quickly, I wanted to go through a couple of other things going on in the world. Ukraine did find evidence of Russian war crimes in newly liberated cities.
Long time ago, Steve.
Okay, that was a long time ago. Kherson, right? Yeah, that's. Well, let's talk real quickly about. First of all, it's been a sort of underreported, but at least 3 people were killed in a shooting at the University of Virginia. A gunman opened fire on the campus late last night, and 2 other people were injured. None of the victims have been named, but once again, violence. And we're going to talk more about it tomorrow, but maybe we can talk about it today. President Biden met with Premier Xi this morning, and it was their first face-to-face meeting as presidents in Bali, Indonesia, a day before a G20 summit and a global forum of the world's most powerful governments. So very interesting. I mean, the China relationship in the U.S. has really deteriorated. It's having ripple effects around the world or the economy. What are your all thoughts about the U.S. and China? I'm going to start with you, Sasha. You bring a great perspective because of your understanding of Russia. But is it a good thing for the U.S. to have relationships with China? How do you do that when you have a country that's fought us economically, that's suppressing people in the country? We don't even know what they're doing. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that for U.S. It's very beneficial to have a good working relationship with China, and that alone, in fact, could make Chinese authorities to reconsider the suppression of minorities people there, because I think obviously what was Trump trying to do with China and just keep imposing the tariffs and going all in against them didn't work very well for obvious reasons, and the results are just right there. So the change in the U.S. policy toward China is a welcome thing. There is another geopolitical consideration: is that China is very close to Russia, and for U.S. the perspective to find two wars, not the one but two, against two strong nuclear powers is not a very practical one. I think if they could get China, and that's I think what Kissinger and Nixon were trying to do in the 70s. It's a very healthy plan to get China on the U.S. side, and I think that's what Biden is trying to do now. And if he will succeed, would be great.
Well, maybe finding common ground where the countries can work together, which is what President Nixon had tried with Kissinger, and that worked, right? And then that led to kind of an open China, a free market China. But that's the biggest challenge, right? They've gone from being a free market economy to now government-controlled industry. Growth has slowed to single digits. So Mark, you were saying.
No, I was going to say, one of the things that I'm always curious about, and I'd love to hear Lee's take on this because he definitely has more political experience than I do and everything, is that a lot of times when we talk about China, we used to talk about Russia this way as well, and also Cuba. We think of them as being these big red scares and all of that because of their communist values or socialist values, depending on which political ideology that you want to think that they are practicing more than the other. But one of the things that I wonder, and I've actually brought up in a couple of conversations with friends and other, is that aren't a lot of the economies very much more similar than they are apart? It's kind of like the Democrats and the Republicans. We oftentimes talk about the differences, and yes, there might be some differences, but in a lot of ways, they are very much have some similar values and have some similar things that are tied together, mainly the way that they are controlled by some of the outside interests, lobbies or whatever. And I would argue that probably the governments, while they have some dissimilarities, have some similarities, because they can argue that there are some human rights violations that we have, just like we argue that there are human rights violations in their countries. They can argue that, yes, they have socialist or communist values, and but they've added some capitalist ways. They can argue that we have capitalist ways, but we've added some socialist values. So, and some of our programming and things of that nature. So are the governments really that far apart, or is this more just some political talk and that they are actually closer together? Because is there really any truly socialist or communist government, and is there any truly capitalist government? Aren't they really a mixture of a little bit of everything? Lee, what's your take?
Okay, first of all, about human rights violation. This is a fiction. There is no substance behind that, because whatever is a human rights violation in the United States is absolutely not in countries like Venezuela or North Korea and maybe some other countries, including China and Russia. I am not going to lecture you about China because I don't know so much about China, but know just a little, but I know quite a lot about Russia and the Soviet Union. So I'll tell you, the history of Russia is the one that there is a history of suppression of people, because there for 1,000 years human being is nothing, state is everything. So whatever people, and because they're so Russia is historically, population of Russia was very poor. If you're taking out some really maybe 0.1% very, very wealthy people, the normal population of Russia all the 1,000 years was very poor. So they were not in a position to fight for any human rights or anything like that. They were empowering the state to take care of everything, so they will live a little bit better and something will be done. And this is an essence of why whatever we consider in Russia is human rights violation. For Russians, it's a normal way of life. So let the government protect everybody. Never mind that this government is stealing left and right from the state. And this government started the horrible war for Russians will be paying for the next 50 years for the results of this war. Doesn't matter. Still, the government the state is everything, the human individual is right, is nothing. That's what we are dealing with, and we have to recognize it. Otherwise, we are going to beat our head in the wall, and nobody needs it. It's
I
not
hear what you're saying. I hear what you're saying, Sasha. But I mean, there are some people that could make the argument, and I think rightfully so, that if lobbyists and other people are having a dire influence on our political landscape, that could be the same thing as the oligarchs taking the money there in Russia and all of that. So there's some people that can make that argument and make it very successfully. I think probably more successfully than I'm doing. There are also some people that can make the argument that if drugs are being used more heavily in urban communities, that cannot be an accidental thing, and that if entire neighborhoods are being destroyed by gentrification and or highways going through them, or environmental kind of disasters potentially happening in poor neighborhoods and in other kinds of neighborhoods, that could be intentional, and that those could be also human rights violations that the U.S. can be involved in as well. And I love my country, and I love what the country is all about, but I'm also aware of some of its flaws, and it's like I know that people in other parts of the world are aware of their flaws. I've always believed that telling somebody to move out of a room that is dirty versus them cleaning up their room is not the same thing. So like I said, if there is issues going on, I'd rather figure out a way to clean up the mess versus moving out of the mess and all in that space. Because there are some people that be like, hey, if there's problems in the U.S., go move to Bali. Go move to Russia. And I'm like, no, I think it's better just to clean up what's going on here versus trying to not acknowledge that it is a problem, even in the way that our prison systems are run and our court systems are run, and some of their unfairness and their injustices as well. But that's just my take on it. And you can choose to disagree or agree. And maybe Lee's got some thoughts as well.
No, Mark, the United States, like it or not, is still, I think, the number one place where people dream of coming to. Obviously, we're not perfect, and we have areas that we can improve in, whether it's capital punishment, whether it's abortion, whether it's human rights in terms of prisoners and what have you. But it's still the number one place on the globe where people will give their all to get here.
No, and I agree with you on that. I think that it is definitely a place that people go to regularly. But even that, I think that we have to look at the ways that we treat the migrants, because even sometimes when we bring people into the migrant community, some migrants are treated better than other migrants. And it could be that they're treated better based on where they are coming from, and also maybe what kind of jobs they're going for. And there are various other factors, but definitely there's never been an argument to say that Haitian immigrants were not treated the same way as the Cuban immigrants, and that the Venezuelan immigrants may not be treated the same as some of the immigrants from India who were in high skilled jobs. No offense, Steve, but definitely we do know that a lot of those are high skilled jobs that are going in from India and some of the parts of Asia.
I'm going to bring back some immigration experts in a few weeks because we've gotten away from that. This year, I didn't focus as much on immigration because I've been so much focusing on election stuff. But, it's a very complex issue. You've got the illegal immigration, which is border issues, which we do have, people crossing the border illegally. The reasons why they're crossing, which we don't talk enough about from a foreign policy perspective, because you got, disruption of democracy taking place all over the United States. We don't have, we confuse asylum with immigration. So asylum is granted when there's no other recourse but to leave this political torture or persecution, whatever. But we don't have enough judges to take these asylum cases, right? And then you've got the skilled immigration, which is, the H-1Bs, the green cards, and then the dreamers, both the documented and undocumented dreamers. And these are the children that are here who are now young adults producing in the economy. So it's really hard to reconcile all of these into one comprehensive bill. And, our immigration system, if you come from India today to the United States, it would take you 150 years to become a citizen. But you can come from Greenland and Iceland, it'll take you maybe a year, if not that, maybe less. So in Canada, it's getting easier for people around the world to go. And so, that's something that we're dealing with globally, right? So Mark, Lee and Mark, it's a complicated issue. We probably dedicated a whole show towards immigration. But
And we are talking about doing that. There's actually a young lady I'm talking about too. Hopefully, she's going to give a show that I think Leo find fascinating. I'm definitely hoping that we can get her to bring it to the network. But it actually looks at immigration from the standpoint of historical figures and whether they would actually get through under modern immigration. So she's actually doing it on another podcast platform, but I'm trying to get her to bring it to us as well. So that would be interesting. So like looking at, say, a historical figure like Benjamin Franklin or somebody else, if they were to go and try to immigrate, whether they would be able to actually succeed and all in that space. Hey,
Mark, can I follow up on something Steve said? Steve, you had asked Sasha about
Yeah.
should we talk to China? Is there
Yeah.
any country that we should not talk to? I mean, in Washington, people who disagree with you, those are the best people, the most important ones to talk to. You don't make peace with enemies unless you talk to them, to
yeah, that's a
understand
good
them.
point. I think
You're not condoning their behavior, but you're just trying to understand it.
yeah, it's a delicate issue, right? I mean, you're right. We have to have there's a difference between diplomacy and saying someone is your best friend, right? So I think that's the fine line. But when you've got countries like, for example, North Korea that's murdering innocent people in the streets and committing genocide and doing awful things that you never see on television because they're not open countries. It's
Right.
hard to when you start talking to them and wanting to work with them, you're sort of implying, well, I accept what you're doing, and so
I
that's
agree with you. Yeah, I agree with what you're
plus-
saying in terms of terrorists, but if they're a member of the United Nations,
yeah. Then I think you have to, right? I mean, that's and I think that the challenge is, good foreign policy might perhaps be. Maybe Biden needs to go back to the Kissinger and the Nixon playbook, right? Which is, what I want to go back and research that. What was the China relationship before President Nixon took the White House, and what were the ways they brought China from Mao to the premiers that were working with Nixon, where they really got some progress, and the China and U.S. became not allies, but they were able to work together to create a more stable world. And so perhaps it's the economy. Perhaps they figure out how they can work together to do that. Perhaps
that's what
it's
Israel did with a lot of countries surrounding them who were previously enemies.
perhaps it's shifting China's strategy towards Russia. I don't know, Sasha, right now, Russia was sort of sitting on the sideline, sort of waiting to see what's going to happen. Could perhaps some political pressure tell the premier of China, okay, if you work with us, we concede on this, could you formally come against China? Could you perhaps work with us to stop oil purchases completely from Russia? I don't know if China would do that, but I think that, or slow it, right? Because we can talk till we're blue in the face. As long as Russia is getting revenue from oil and gas, we are just basically allowing revenue to flow to a maniacal dictator who is murdering innocent children and people. This man is a murderer. I'm going to call him a murderer. He is a murderer,
Yeah.
and he should be taken out of power, removed out of power. But right now, and I'm just calling it like it is. I mean, when you see on 60 Minutes what happened in Bucha, it brought tears to my eyes. And Sasha, I know we've talked about that before, but the real life examples of what's going on there, right? So,
Well, before Bucha, there was a possibility to settle this conflict or at least stop the battles, get maybe to some kind of understanding or agreement or at least temporary peace or something. But once people discovered, and all the world at that point, what's happened in Bucha and other places, all talks with Russians could not be implemented in any capacity. In any case, they just murderers. They cannot be talked to. They all have to be just destroyed and killed, and systematically. Now, what's happened is Ukraine actually redraws a world map, including economic map and political map, and everything is all done only because of the Ukraine. So US, when people are complaining that they're sending so much money to Ukraine and so much weapons or so on, these people have such a short sight. They don't understand what Ukraine did for US with their lives, 100,000 plus. They redrew the world map and brought US just walk in and reap all the fruits available to you, including China, including Europe, including everything. It's US is in command. And I must give some credit to Biden, actually, that he was able to unite the European coalition. So they're all G7s and European Union and individual countries and their leaders. They're all coming and working as one. That never happened when Trump was a president and he was bitching, oh, you don't pay enough money, we will they draw the map and we will absorb, we will stop the NATO because there is no reason for NATO and so on. When you give the this is another shortcoming of US politics, that a charlatan, basically person who all his life used to swindle people, beside being also a KGB asset, could come to the supreme power of United States of America, being a real nobody, never run any political organization, real well, I want to stop right there. I don't want to keep insulting him. Not that he cares, but rather maybe there are some people in the program who love Trump. Hello.
Sasha, shouldn't the American citizen be entitled to accountability where those dollars are going? Or should be just in blindly?
No, but okay, what do you mean by accountability? Like in which way?
Well,
as far as I know, a lot of money has been given to Ukraine with no accountability where the money is being gone.
No. Let's count about accountability. Besides the fact that all what's happening now in Ukraine is U.S. fault, because in 1994 it swindled Ukraine, presenting them with the plan that there will be a peace, we're guaranteeing your territory and so on. Just give your nukes to Russia and Ukraine. At that time had the third largest.
That's all true.
Okay.
That's all true what you're saying.
Okay. How much it's worth? $50 trillion? $100 trillion?
I'm not putting a cap
I
on
don't
dollars.
know.
I'm just saying.
Well, you guaranteed something. Okay, come up and pay and stop crying. Oh, we have to pay. Now, I want to tell you something else. As I said just before, 5 minutes ago, the Ukrainian people, with incredible sacrifices of 100,000 people plus, delivers to US all the power in politics, in economies. Everything is brought to the plate in US. It's just given to you. Use it. You can now talk to China. You can now oversee the demise of Russia, which was a major war power, which could destroy, and still can destroy US, by the way. So Ukraine made sure that this is all being now demolished. All Russia and its leadership, it's all going to be demolished, and very, very soon. This is Ukraine doing. So what money are you talking about? What money? You're printing.
But hold on a second.
US is going to cook for $200 trillion anyway. You were giving to Afghanistan in 20 years 1,000 times more money than whatever you gave so far to Ukraine. And what gains have you got in Afghanistan? What's the use of that? You never ask that question? No,
I do ask that question also.
You do? And what's the answer to that?
And they're saying that they don't want to give an accountability. They say they're above that. They don't have to.
And to both you, Lee, and definitely Sasha, I mean, one of the things that I think more and more, it happens every time that there is a major war and money starts going out to that major war. Then people start looking around and they start asking themselves, like, yes, there is these billions, if not trillions of dollars going to the war and to support the Ukrainian army and definitely get rid of this horrible dictator. and all in that space. But then people are also looking around their own backyards and they're going like, whether they're in Los Angeles, whether they're in Durham, North Carolina, or whether they're in New York, and they're seeing veterans that are having issues, and they're seeing homeless folks that are not having homes, and they're seeing a rise in rents, and they're going like, wait a minute, I love that they are getting money to get rid of a dictator, but where is this helping me in my backyards? I think that that's even what some of the voters were wondering as well, because they are trying to figure out, and it's not just Ukraine, so I'm not just putting it on there, because the money is going to a number of countries, and it's also going to our military industrial complex and all of that. So a lot of people are going like, why are we buying the latest new toys and all of that in the military if we're not going to deal with the stuff that is happening on our home front and try to make those corrections as well? And I do think that that became an issue that people started looking at during this last election cycle. And I think that people will still continue to look at that issue, because at this point, people are like, we're supposedly coming out of this pandemic. That's what they keep claiming and everything. And like I said, I was just at an event, and there was definitely a small audience. It wasn't a full house or anything, but the people were not masked up or anything of that nature, and they were enjoying themselves. So more and more I get out, the more I see people. And as they get out in the public, they are going to start wondering the direct impact to their own lives and all of that, particularly their own personal economy. And I think that that's why people will start looking and saying, where is the final result? When will we get a victory from Ukraine? And after that victory, then maybe that's when we pay attention to what's going on inside. But some people are not going to want to wait what they feel might be a 3 to 5 year war. I'm hoping not, Sasha. I want this thing to end sooner versus later. And I definitely think that the Ukrainian side is the side that needs to win. I would love it to end tomorrow. But I'm just thinking that the war itself seems like it's going to drag on. So that being said, I think that people will start looking at the cost, and whether that cost is not going to impact their own direct cost.
Yeah, I think, and I think that's the key, right? I mean, we how all this aid that we give to other countries, how do we balance that with people having less money? The other thing we forgot to mention is Biden's student loan forgiveness pretty much is on hold because of the courts. Which have now held it up. And so their website is saying you can't process loan forgiveness. And the other thing, before we move to close out, that we didn't talk about today, but I do think it's important to look at what happened in North Carolina with these elections. The one thing I will say, there was recently an article in the Sunday Raleigh News and Observer, and basically what it says is that, the Democrats have continued to say in North Carolina that the growth in the urban areas is going to make it inevitable that Democrats eventually win. And that's created a more passive approach, and they haven't been investing in the infrastructure in the more rural parts of the state. And so the messaging's been off, and this Beasley loss was a huge loss to Democrats in North Carolina, but most importantly, losing the 2 seats on the Supreme Court. Keep in mind, one of the lawyers who won has never been a judge, and he beat a 3-term or 2-term U.S. Supreme Court North Carolina Supreme Court, Sam Ervin, whose grandfather was Senator Sam Ervin from North Carolina, who led the investigation against President Nixon. Amazing that someone who had never been a judge won in a resounding victory. And so that's going to make a lot of changes, from abortion to gerrymandering, holding up the maps. And we had Senator Nickel here, and one thing that he confirmed to me is that in December, the Republicans in the General Assembly are going to go back into a session and basically draw him out of his district, so that next time he runs, he won't be able to run. That's just not right. How can we? And I don't know, Mark, why that's happening so much in North Carolina, because that doesn't seem to be happening in California and other states. But in our state, these maps keep shifting every few years, and then there's a lawsuit, and they come back.
I mean, people could argue that it's a return to the Southern strategy, and those that watch politics don't know what that is, because definitely there were some efforts to try to retain control of some of the Southern states, and it could be that is also partially what is happening. And there's definitely some folks that could say that is one of the theories. And one thing that I was going to get to, and I know that we're going to wind down, another lively conversation and all of that, but I'd love to hear from definitely Lee and you, what is going to happen in the leadership of the Senate and the House, because that's one of the other things I was talking about on my ride back from Dublin yesterday, is trying to figure out, Nancy's probably retiring, or at least stepping down, because she won't have control of the House. And a lot of people are upset with Mr. McCarthy because they feel that he is maybe didn't give enough support to the Republican candidates. And definitely there are some factions that are Trump based. You were talking about the Trump factions. There are definitely some Trump factions that might decide to ease him out of the office and all in that space. So who is going to be the leader of either the Republican or the Democratic Party as they have to get some leadership?
I think in the Senate, you're looking at Senator Chuck Schumer would retain it, right? He's right now. I think it'll stay the same. I think in the House, if the Democrats retain control, and it's not Pelosi, most likely Adam Schiff will be the next speaker, or possibly a Hail Mary, but Ro Khanna, who is I think just won his third term, Indian American, which his name's been thrown out there. Potential presidential contender. So if he were made the speaker, that could definitely elevate his political career. But I think that he would not have the seniority that is required to be the speaker. So I would have to go back and look and see who would be the next in line. But my money would say most likely Adam Schiff. And if it's the Republicans, I don't know. I still think they would give it to McCarthy. But who knows if he can get the votes? Who else? But it would be maybe. I mean, they pick a more moderate Republican, but are there any in the House? I don't know.
Steve, is it basically seniority, or is it people have to based on leadership skills or something else?
I think it's a mixture of both. I mean, I think, I'm a big Ro Khanna fan. I think it would be good to have a young, dynamic speaker. He's an Indian American, Stanford law professor. He's brilliant, very smart. But seniority does factor in. If someone's been in there 10 years, 12 years, 14 years, they're going to have. So Adam Schiff has the experience. He's very smart, Ivy League educated, has the backing of most of the Democrats. If I were a betting man, I would say if the Democrats do control, it'll most likely be Adam Schiff. Mark, we're getting ready for closeout.
Oh yeah, totally ready for closeout and all of that. And definitely, like I said, a great conversation, great things that were said and all of that. There were a couple of other just quick things in the news, and I'm going to toss it to you for closeout and all along those lines. But I did see that there was a couple of just world things that we did not get to, including the Istanbul bomb that took place in Turkey. And they were saying that it was a Syrian national with ties to Kurdish groups that was responsible for that, and Germany was complaining to Egypt over some COP27 snooping. So that was going on, and definitely we're hearing a lot about some of the technology firings and the impact that has had on different folks as well. So definitely that is some of the things that we heard about in the news that we did not get to. Oh, and we did not get to, of course, that great social news since we were bashing up on Trump. But apparently he had some good news in his family because apparently the younger daughter got married over this weekend and all in that space. So apparently he was over there just opening and having a good old time at Mar-a-Lago with that latest Trump wedding and all in that space. So on that note, that's some of the things that you did mention, the shooting at Virginia. So I will now toss it over to you.
We all remember her favorite song, Stand By Your Man. Of course, many of the things you did with Kenny Rogers, but Dolly Parton received $100 million from Amazon founder Jeff Bezos of the Courage and Civility Award for all that she's done in terms of philanthropy. So congratulations, queen of country, Dolly Parton. The other thing I'll mention is we pray for Turkey as an attack took place in one of the pedestrian thoroughfares in Istanbul, injuring at least 81 people, and I think 6 have died in that. So that's sad. And finally, I want to end the show with
one last thing before you get to the final. I did forget to mention just really quickly, because it is Veterans Day, not just here in our part of the world, but as far as I'm concerned, and I know that the King Charles was doing something with it. Armistice Day, it sounds like their version of Veterans Day, and that was this past weekend as well. So I definitely want to give a salute out to the military veterans, not just of the United States, but as Shaquille likes to point out, a lot of the wars did have other allies that were in the wars as well. And definitely that was a case of them honoring their veterans with Armistice Day, which I believe was yesterday.
Right. Yeah. My grandfather fought in the British Army. And so maybe, but then they became India. Your phone now, finally, I'll end on innovation. we talk about innovation and technology. This evening in Durham, they're talking about ShotSpotter, which is a shot detection and dealing with gun violence. But very interesting, it's come to our attention that there's an early new warning system called Shake Alert, and it can give you a few seconds to drop, cover, or prepare for an earthquake before it reaches your location. It's active in California, Oregon, and Washington, and Alaska could be the next. And you get alerts on your Android and your iPhones. A perfect example of how technology can be used to help us with disasters, get visibility of data, and help keep us safe. Who would ever thought that these smartphones would be more than just things we could take pictures of others, or get on the phone, or play our games on our devices, or text the hundreds of texts we send a day, but the fact that these technologies can be used to save lives. Perhaps this kind of innovation can be going on to focus on other weather disasters, particularly hurricanes and tornadoes. I find this to be a game-changing innovation and one that we should all be excited about. Thank you all so much for being with us on Pod and Roku TV's World Edition. We'll bring you back tomorrow for another exciting edition. From our family to yours, let the light and love of your hearts always lift us out of the darkness, and have a wonderful day or evening wherever you are in the nation or world. Thank you.